Ryan sat on the edge of the bed in her and Jungkook's room, staring blankly at the wall in front of her. The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence, the tension thick enough to cut through with a knife. She heard a soft knock on the door, and before she could respond, Taehyung entered, his expression filled with guilt and regret. He hesitated for a moment before sitting beside her, reaching out to hold her hand. Van pulled away slightly, her eyes narrowing as she looked at him. The silence was broken as Taehyung took a deep breath, his voice barely above a whisper as he spoke. I'm sorry, Ryan, he said, his words heavy with emotion. I know I've hurt you deeply, and I can never forgive myself for what I have done. Ryan remained silent, her gaze fixed on the floor. Taehyung's hand trembled slightly, his eyes pleading for forgiveness. I shouldn't have said all those things yesterday. I know I was being selfish. I never thought about your feelings. Sorry. Tried telling you about my feelings, but there were certain reasons. I'm sorry, Ryan. It's hard for me to forgive you right now. Ryan finally spoke. Her voice cold and emotionless, maybe in the future, but please, not now. Taehyung's shoulders slumped in defeat as he nodded, understanding her words. He watched as Ryan stood up from her bed, her movements controlled and precise. Without another word, she walked towards the door, her back straight and her face impassive. As she left the room, Taehyung was left alone with his thoughts, the weight of his actions heavy on his heart. He closed his eyes, willing himself to find a way to make things right, to earn Ryan's forgiveness. But deep down, he knew that some wounds ran too deep to heal easily, and that some mistakes could never be undone. As he sat in the empty room, the silence echoing around him, Taehyung knew that he would have to live with the consequences of his actions for the rest of his life. Vian's footsteps echoed through the hallway as she made her way to the living room. Her mind racing with conflicting emotions. She could feel the weight of Taehyung's apology hanging in the air. His words still lingering in her ears, but despite his heartfelt plea for forgiveness, she couldn't shake off the hurt and betrayal that had settled deep within her heart. As she was still lost in her thoughts about Taehyung's apology, she heard a clatter coming from the kitchen. Curious, she made her way to the source of the noise and found Jungkook standing in front of the stove. A look of concentration on his face as he attempted to cook something. What are you doing, Jungkook? Ryan asked, unable to hide the amusement in her voice. Jungkook turned around, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. I thought I'd try my hand at cooking. How hard could it be, right? Ryan couldn't help but chuckle at his confident yet clueless expression. Do you even know what you're making? Jungkook scratched his head, looking at the pot on the stove with a mixture of uncertainty and determination. I may have improvised a little, but don't worry, I got this. Wan watched as Jungkook stirred the contents of the pot, the aroma of burnt food wafting through the air. She couldn't help but laugh at the sight of him trying so earnestly to cook something edible. As Jungkook turned to grab a spatula, he accidentally knocked over a jar of spices. Causing it to spill all over the counter. Wine stifled a giggle. He then reached out to the higher cabinet to get flour, not knowing the bag was open, and ended up spilling it all over himself. Van burst into laughter at the comical chaos unfolding before her. Jungkook blushed and looked up, a mixture of embarrassment and amusement crossing his features. Okay, maybe I underestimated this whole cooking thing. Van wiped away tears of laughter from her eyes, trying to catch her breath. I think that's an understatement, Jungkook. Despite the culinary disaster unfolding in front of them, Van found herself laughing wholeheartedly. The tension and sadness from earlier slowly melting away. Jungkook joined in her laughter, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Well, they do say laughter is the best medicine, right? Van nodded, feeling grateful for the unexpected moment of levity. that Jungkook had brought into her day. I think Mr. Cook should not cook. Jungkook chuckled at the joke, wiping off the flour from his face. In that moment, she realized that sometimes it's the simple moments of joy and laughter that can help heal a wounded heart. Let me help you clean up. As they cleaned up the mess together, exchanging playful banter and sharing light-hearted jokes, Van felt a sense of friendship blossoming between them. Despite the challenges they faced, she knew that with Jungkook by her side, there would always be moments of laughter and joy to brighten even the darkest days. And as they sat down together to enjoy a simple meal of takeout, surrounded by the remnants of Jungkook's failed cooking experiment, Van couldn't help but smile at the unexpected turn of events. In that moment, she realized that sometimes laughter truly is the best medicine. Especially when shared with a friend like Jungkook. The evening sun cast a warm glow through the windows as Ryan curled up on the couch, engrossed in a book. The peaceful atmosphere was shattered when her mother in law, Mrs. Kim, entered the living hall with a look of worry etched on her face. Ryan looked up from her book, concern flickering in her eyes. What's wrong, Amanim? You look tense. Mrs. Kim wrung her head nervously, her voice quivering. Ryan, Taehyung is nowhere to found. His stuff is not in his room, and I can't reach him on his phone. Vian's heart skipped a beat at the news. Panic surged through her veins. She set the book aside and stood up, her mind racing with a million questions and fears. It's it's okay, Amanim. Let's find him together. He must be somewhere near. Don't worry. Together, Vian and Mrs. Kim searched every corner of the house, calling out Taehyung's name in desperation. But there was no sign of him anywhere. The realization sank in that Taehyung had deliberately left, leaving behind a void that echoed in the empty rooms. As they retraced their steps to Taehyung's room, Vian noticed a folded piece of paper lying on his desk. She picked it up with trembling hands and unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words written in Taehyung's familiar handwriting. I can't stay here anymore. This place suffocates me. Please don't try to look for me. I'll come back when I'm ready. The words hit Vian like a sledgehammer, tears welling up in her eyes as she struggled to process the sudden revelation. Taehyung had run away, leaving behind his family and everything. Was it because of her? He felt suffocated because of her. Mrs. Kim collapsed onto Taehyung's bed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Vine felt a surge of empathy for her mother in law, knowing the pain and confusion she must be feeling at that moment. It is all my fault. I should have agreed to him, her mother in law cried, making her confused. What are you talking about, Amma?